He slept little the night before, as if sleep itself had turned traitor. In the dark of the Tower of the Hand, he lay with the ache in his splinted leg, listening to the keep breathe. The red keep breathed like an old beast, river wind wheezing through arrow slits and galleries, the susurrus of silk and whispers, a rattle of mail when a watchman shifted his weight, the remembered scream of steel in a street now quiet. When Eddard Stark closed his eyes, he saw Jory's blood and a horse's hoof coming down and the sudden weightless tumble into pain. When he opened them, he saw the pale shape of the Godswood's heart tree in memory, the red eyes carved into it, and the woman who had looked at him in the shade of those leaves with something like scorn for his honesty and something like pity for his doom. He rose before dawn, alone in a room meant for a court of retainers and scribes. It smelled faintly of vellum and smoke, and the onyx and gold hands brooch on the table looked like someone else's medallion. He set it on his tunic with hands more careful than he felt and tested his walking again. The weight of the ashwood came a relief and a shame. A servant had left him bread and a wedge of cheese. He chewed mechanically. Water lapped at the city's edges, the Blackwater River whispering up against quays and pilings with secrets of tide. Above, a faint paling in the eastern windows hinted at a sky preparing to open its eyes. The bells of the great September of Baylor would sound soon, and the sound would move through the city like a spear through wool. He had set the hour himself. He had not asked leave. There came the soft knock he had expected, and then Varys put his perfumed head through the door, as if one might catch a scent before one caught a sight. "My lord Hand," Varys murmured, closing the door with a careful hand. He wore a robe like mist and a face like a candle held too close to heat. "You are awake. I confess I feared the milk of the poppy would cling to you this morning more tightly than a lover." "I asked Maester Pycelle for none," Ned said, leaning on his cane. He had learned something about the uses to which old men and old drugs were put in this city. "Ah!" Varys smiled without showing a tooth. "You asked. How rare that word becomes here. Did you see the High Septon?" "I saw him, yes." Varys lifted his hands, plump fingertips touching as if to bless the air. It is no easy thing to put a crown beneath a crystal crown. At first he wept into his sleeves and spoke about the kings of old. He reminded me of seas vast, and yet more overflowing the shallower they are. But his high holiness is much moved by the perils of the soul, and you were very wise to couch your request in those terms. Incest, adultery, false issue. These are stones that crack even thick glass. Ned's jaw tightened. "I spoke truth, of course, and the truth is most persuasive when the city hears it as prayer rather than proclamation." Varys breathed deep. "He will open the September. He will sit beneath the Father's stern gaze, and he will say that where the gods must judge, the faith must host. The bells will summon the faithful, and the faithful will bring the city, and the city will bring us a kind of safety. Perhaps only the kind that keeps a man from being murdered in daylight." "Daylight will help," Ned said. He fixed the brooch against his breast. The pain in his leg offered its dull consent with each heartbeat. "Did you carry my summons to the men I named?" "I carried them as far as I dared." Varys inclined his head. "Ser Barristan sits in the White Sword Tower. He received your note with a face like a grave, but he did not tear it." Renly Baratheon laughed until his eyes were bright, and then he folded the letter and slid it into his belt and said that the gods had better taste in entertainment than he. Ser Loras Tyrell swore to no one and nothing, as befits a cunning youth, but he sent away his squires with his helm. "And the commander of the city watch?" "To Janos Slynt I carried a different letter, as you wished. It rattled when he shook it. The poor thing, your gold clinks like fear." He smiled and spoke of duty and the peace of the city, and then he sent for his captains. Ned's throat felt dry as the dust of the hall. "And Littlefinger?" For the first time that morning the spymaster blinked quickly, as if dust had actually stung his eyes. "Lord Baelish is heir where you reach for him. He heard something, of course. He hears everything and understands half, which is the deadliest ratio. He will be waiting in a place where he can turn with whichever wind blows hardest." "That seems more prophecy than report." "It is what I have." Varys said softly. "Shall I say I wish you well? I have lived long by seldom wishing anyone anything, but this morning it seems fitting." He inclined himself almost to the floor. "When the bells speak, my lord hand, speak louder." After he had gone, Ned stood for a long moment with the cane pressing into the grain of the floor. A wind that smelled like heated fish crept through the shutters. He thought of his daughters, 2 lights in different colors. Sansa would be laced into something delicate by Septa Mordain, and she would stand very straight and try to make her mouth align, but her eyes would show all her wishes. Arya would be somewhere she had been told not to be, breathing fast and angry as a colt. He wished he could put one hand on each of their heads and make the world not what it was. Instead, he went to the door and took to the corridors of the Red Keep, feeling that he walked narrow bridges over pits. There is a way to move through a castle that makes your enemies think you do not fear ambush. He practiced it. He gave the men he passed, Lannister guardsmen in red and gold cloaks with their painted helms, courtiers already oiled for the day, his ice-blue glance and the brief nod of a lord too polite to count his steps. It made him slower than his leg reminded him with each stride why haste was a god's luxury. The Red Keep had been built with alcoves for whispering and corridors for flight. He passed a gallery of dead kings painted with more courage than they had shown, each with a hunting dog at his heel. When he climbed the narrow stair toward the White Sword Tower, the dawn drew itself across the horizon in a red stroke like a wound. He thought of Robert's body below stone, and of the sealed letter naming him protector of the realm. He had not held power long enough to be corrupted by it, but long enough to see how quickly it set other men on fire. Ser Barristan opened the door himself before Ned had finished knocking. The Lord Commander's hair was more white than any other color, and his eyes were the kind that weighed a man and gave him back either contempt or respect. He stepped aside and let Ned limp in. "Lord Eddard," Barristan said, voice as thin as paper. "It is early. It must be. We have left ourselves little day." They sat across from each other in a chamber spare and bright, its shutters thrown open to a pearly light. A white cloak hung from a peg like a strip torn from snow. On the table lay a book, open, the pages a ledger of the Kingsguard's vows. Ned had seen such books before. He had read words there that had made his heart hot, glory and shame bound together in neatly written lines. "You wrote that you would drag the truth out into the open and make it stand there until even the craven saw it," Barristan said. "And you wrote that you asked me not as a servant of the Queen, but as a knight sworn to the realm." Ned nodded. "Then you asked me to set myself against the Queen. I ask you to put yourself between the Queen and the truth, so that the truth does not take a sword in the back while it speaks." Ned folded his hands against the cane head. "Her Grace is accused of crimes against the gods. The Faith will host the trial. If she had stood and asked for the gods to judge her, I would not be here, but she has not, so I must." Barristan's mouth tightened in what might have been the shadow of a smile. "You are a strange politician, Lord Stark." "I am no politician," Ned said. "The gods help me. I am a father and a soldier and a fool. And a lord." Barristan looked past him at the dawn. "In the tourney lists, men are known for the day they triumphed. In the White Book, men are known for what they did in whole lives. When I was young, I thought the biggest thing I could do in service to honor was to cleave a villain in two. Now, I fear sometimes the largest things are quiet. Refusals, sufferings. I do not care to suffer. I am tired of refusing." He drew a breath. "You shall have me." The relief Ned felt made him lighter on his cane. "I am grateful, Ser Barristan." "Do not be." Barristan's eyes cut like a blade. "I have sworn to guard a king. There is no king in the Red Keep today. It may be that I am too used to giving my sword to crowns. For this one day, I will give it to the Father's scales." He rose. "We will meet at the September." When Ned left him, the bells began. They came in first as a far tremor through the stone, a shiver in banisters and swimming candle flames. Then the city took them up, and the sound rolled and rolled, overlapping throats of bronze and iron, so that it seemed the hills themselves spoke the gods' names. Heads turned toward the sound. Windows opened with little cries. The narrow ways that ran down to the river filled and then spilled into broader streets as if water had been poured. In the queen's apartments, the bells made pure rage seem thinner. Cersei stood with the High Septon's summons in her hand while Pycelle fussed and muttered behind her. The summons was stern, but it had been written in a clerk's careful hand, and she imagined the clerk's heart giggling like a child at the danger the wax carried. "His Holiness dares much," Pycelle said, stroking his ragged beard. "It has not been done. Oh, in 100 years and more, perhaps. The faith judging one anointed queen. The faith does what it is told," Cersei cut in. She wore green cloth of gold that made her hair a brighter style of metal. She crushed the parchment and let it slip from her fingers to the floor. "Where are my sons?" "Prince Joffrey," Pycelle began. "My son," Cersei said, feeling herself breathe. "Not the other." Stannis would have called this arrogance. Robert would have called it honesty. "Where is Joff?" "In his solar," Pycelle murmured, "with the Hound and Ser Meryn. He is angry to be kept from hunting." "Good," Cersei said. "Let him be angry. He will learn something new, for once." She crossed to the window. Outside, the bells threw a net over the city, pulled every fish from the sea to one place. She could see the white steps of the great September shining through the heat haze, banners of the Seven barely stirring. Her mouth tasted of brass and ash. "Send to Janos Slint. I want the gold cloaks at the September in force. I want the High Septon to see a wall of helms before his doors." Pycelle bobbed. "Yes, your grace. And where is Lord Peter?" "He was to breakfast with me. A matter at the treasury kept him." The old man lied badly. "You know how he takes pride in the city's purse." "Pride," Cersei said, and laughed without humor. "Bring me wine." When he shuffled out, she stood very still and let anger wash her clean. They thought to humiliate her. They thought to drag her into a holy house and hold her up to the light like a beetle. Eddard Stark and his northern righteousness, that slow, square face. It did not matter. Men had derided her before. She had seen them die with the derision still on their lips. She went to Joffrey's solar and found the boy pacing. He was almost as tall as she now and so much more raw. Fury had stretched him and sharpened him, but it had not made him careful. "Mother," Joff said, turning, "they say the fat priest has ordered me to come to the September. He may see a man dogs and beggars. He does not command princes." Cersei smiled in a way that made lesser courtiers sweat. "He commands the bells, and the bells command the small folk, and the small folk make a city, Joff. We will go to the September and stand where they bid us and smile and say the words. We will do it because the city believes in stories, and we must keep telling ours until no other fits in their ears." "The Hound says we may as well fight," Joff said, glancing toward Sandor Clegane. The man leaned against a pillar, his burned man's face calm as old clay. His eyes were not calm. Beside him Ser Meryn Trant stood dull and heavy-eyed, one gauntlet on, one in his hand. "I have swords. You will have discipline," Cersei said. "And if swords are required, you will have them." She moved close enough to place 2 fingers against the boy's cheek. "You will watch, learn who stands where, learn who can be used." Sandor tilted his head, the half of his face that was still a man's flickering with a smile too brief for warmth. "And if the fat priest orders the gods to knock heads together?" he asked. Cersei's smile sharpened. "If a man in a crystal crown takes it in mind to make war on lions, Hound, he will learn what crystal does against tooth." She looked past him to Ser Meryn. "Send for Ser Boros, Ser Ares, Ser Mandon, Ser Preston. I want them all." "Jaime is not here," Joff said, frowning. He knew, and yet he kept discovering it as if it were new. He had never learned to keep grief silent. "No," Cersei said, and would not let her mouth make the shape of his name. "Your father is not here." The bells kept on. Beneath them, the city walked toward its chosen theater. By the time Ned's litter reached the lower square before the Great September, the steps were a river of people. He had tried to come on foot, to put himself among the city's breathing, but the leg would not permit it. Men recognized him through the curtain of the litter and murmured, and some spat, and one old woman made a sign with her fingers that was neither northern nor southern and might have been meant to turn away evil. Janos Slint met the litter with a bow that asked to be remembered. The commander wore a furred mantle despite the day and had a smile that showed his back teeth. "Lord Hand," he said, "we keep order. No man shall say the city watch cannot keep order." Ned saw the ranks of gold cloaks on the steps and the lines of Lannister spears glinting red. Between those walls a path had been made. Beyond, the doors of the September were open. The smell of incense came like a memory of forests. Sweet, resinous, like sap and rot together. "Good," Ned said. "Keep order." Janos gestured to a captain near him, a lean man with a scar like a crooked finger down his cheek. "Ser Jacelyn Bywater," he said, "one of my best. He will put his sword where you point." Bywater's eyes were the eyes of a man who had looked at himself in water and learned that ripples sometimes gave you a better truth. He bowed curtly, not deep. "My lord, Ser Jacelyn," Ned said, "you will place your men along the nave and around the dais. No one draws steel unless commanded by the faith or by me. If any man raises a sword against a champion before the trial is done, you cut him down. If any man puts a hand to my daughters, you cut that hand off and feed it to him." A flicker went through Bywater, as if a stone had dropped into his attention and disappeared. "As you say." Ned climbed from the litter with Varys' hand under one elbow. He did not look at the eunuch, and gripped his cane and began to climb. Each step was pain wrapped around bone, but the bells made little spaces between hurts. People made room for him. He saw a woman breastfeeding a child beneath the mother's statue, bare and unashamed. He saw a beggar kneeling and kissing the hem of a guard's cloak until his mouth found something else to open. Inside the September it was cooler and full of the strange half-light that came through stained glass. The 7 great statues watched. The father's marble eyes were blind and all-seeing. The warrior clasped a sword. The smith held a hammer. The maiden looked carved of water. Fire baskets smoked. The high septon sat beneath the father, with his crystal crown trembling and flashing with 100 little rainbows like trapped souls. His fat hands worried a piece of cloth as if he could rub the day away. Cersei entered a quarter hour later, with Joffrey at her side and 4 white cloaks spreading like sails behind. Ser Meryn, Ser Boros, Ser Ares, Ser Mandon. Ned marked them as if he were counting stones on a river bed. Sandor Clegane came behind, his mail dark, his burned skin a badge older than any oath. Ser Preston appeared moments after, hard-faced, his hair already sweating beneath the white enamel. Lancel Lannister, thin as a reed and pale as milk, hovered at the edge of the Queen's party, his green eyes flickering with anxiety and pride. Ned felt his mouth stiffen. He had not asked for that sight, but the gods had a way of sending omens whether one liked them or not. The High Septon lifted both hands, and the bells outside fell obediently into silence. The city held its breath in the sudden absence of sound. "Children," the High Septon said, and his voice was like oil poured into a bowl. "Children of the 7, we are called to a grave matter. The hand of the king brings accusation against the queen." He paused as if afraid the words would summon flame. "Accusations of fornication and incest, of bringing forth false issue to the realm." A murmur rose, ran like a rat under benches, flicked tails and vanished. Cersei lifted her head. "This is an outrage," she said pleasantly. "The hand has taken leave of his senses, your holiness. If I have offended the gods, let the gods judge me. I consent to their judgment." She looked at Ned as if he were a stain. "I demand trial by combat." The High Septon swallowed. "It is within your rights, gracious queen." "Trial by 7, she added and smiled. "We are in the great September on a holy day. Let the 7 be served by 7s. Ned felt something in his chest loosen. He had not known whether she would choose it. He had only suspected she would prefer swords to witnesses. Now the thing he had gambled on would take life. "You shall be granted trial by 7. the High Septon said. His hands trembled. One small crystal fell from his crown's edge and bounced once and lay like a frozen tear. Who shall stand for you? My son is present, Cersei said, and let the words sit like wine in sunlight. He cannot be asked to lower his blade against his mother's enemies. For him I name men in whom I have put my trust. Ser Marentrant, Ser Boros Blunt, Ser Mandon Moore, Ser Ares Oakhart, Ser Preston Greenfield. She paused. Her eyes slid to Sandor. Sandor Clegane, if he cares to earn what he eats. Her smile sharpened. And Ser Lancel Lannister. Lancel flinched, his mouth opening and shutting. Then he set his jaw and nodded once, the gesture of a boy playing at being a man. Joffrey looked at him with momentary contempt that turned quickly into satisfaction when he saw the boy would obey. The High Septon's eyes slid to Ned. And who stands for the accuser, Lord Hand? Justice, Ned said, and heard the weariness in his own mouth. But since justice is a dream, I will have men. He turned and spoke the names he had gathered in the night like a poor man's harvest. Ser Barristan Selmy, Lord Commander of the Kingsguard. Barristan stepped forward without looking at the Queen. When he unpinned his white cloak, the heavy silence shifted, and even Cersei's face grew still. He folded the cloth with a reverence he had not shown the High Septon and set it upon a bench. Ser Loras Tyrell. The youth came lithe and bright, bareheaded. When he removed his helm, the brown hair fell to his shoulders like a girl's, and yet the gaze was all iron. Cersei's mouth almost curved, and then did not. Ser Jacelyn Bywater. Bywater left a row of gold cloaks to step to Ned's side. The ripple among the watch was palpable. Janos Slint's jaw clamped shut. Ser Aron Santagar. The Dornish knight bowed, dark eyes steady. Falcon feather earrings moved in a small wind from the open doors. Ser Balon Swan. The Stormlander was not yet wearing white. He wore well-forged plain steel and a thick black mustache. He had the face of a man who took each decision out and looked at it until it told him what it would cost. He nodded briefly to the High Septon and then to Ned, and took his place. Syrio Farrell of Bravos. There was a rustle at that. The Bravosi came out of the crowd like a fish slipping from shade to sunlight. He had no mail. He had a leather jerkin and a long, thin blade at his hip that looked like a quill. His eyes were bright, bright. He bowed to the maiden's statue with an extravagant grace that made some in the crowd laugh and some hiss. Cersei's expression curdled, and Joffrey looked amused until he was not. And Eddard Stark, Ned finished. Varys sucked in a breath through his teeth, and somewhere Sansa cried out softly, and Arya's breath made a little hard sound. Ned went forward. He did not take off any cloak because he had put on no adornments. He set the cane aside. The world telescoped. The white of marble, the colors in the glass, the smell of incense, the ache in his leg, the knowledge of a sword's weight in his hand, felt like falling toward a winter lake. He was grateful, suddenly, to have known the feel of hearth smoke rising through a timbered hall, to have known Rob's first laugh and Jon's first bruised jaw from the yard and Bran's small hand gripping his finger like a hawk's foot. He thought, if I cannot stand at the end of this, at least I did not sit while this was done. The High Septon spread his hands. Then let the gods judge, he whispered. Let the warrior stand at each man's elbow. Let the father hold the scales. He looked like a man who had agreed to be thrown into the river because someone promised him it was shallow. Steel slid from sheath. It filled the September's long lungs with a sound like rain suddenly turning to hail. The champions stood on the mosaic floor, a sunburst overweened by sword-shaped shadows, and regarded those who would kill them. Sandor Clegane took off his helm and set it by his foot. His burned ear twitched once. Ser Mandon's eyes were colorless and indistinct, like a smear of fish fat on water. Ser Ares Oakhart tightened a strap and looked very young. Ser Boros breathed through his mouth. Ser Preston flexed his fingers. Ser Marin's expression said he had stood too long and would be happier sitting. On Ned's side, Loras drew in a breath that made his ribs expand and then smiled a small private smile. Barristan dipped his blade slightly toward the father statue, which nodded not at all. Santagar rolled his shoulders once. Balon Swan rubbed his thumb across the falchion's guard and let it rest there, a ritual. Bywater spat onto the floor and then looked faintly ashamed when he realized where he had spit. Sirio drew the Bravosi blade with a whispering hiss and looked up into the colored rows of glass above the mother as if to catch luck. Ned had ice no longer. He had a long, good castle-forged sword the size of his arm. It felt heavy and sufficient. For a beat no one moved. The city tried to hold still with them. Ned heard a child stifle a giggle in some far corner. Then Sandor Clegane sighed like a bellows and stepped into motion, and the trial began. Later, even men who had never seen a melee would say they had. When blows fall under God's eyes, they fall in story. But the first moments were clumsy, as all dances are before they find their rhythm. Loras moved first among Ned's men, a flicker of blue and silver in motion, and went for Sandor with a thrust that the hound caught up on a half-shield as if he had been expecting it all his life. The shock sang up. Loras' arms. He smiled wider, and that smile made the hound's good eye brighten like iron pushed toward heat. Sirio went not for the biggest man but for the one who looked least awake, and Ser Marin Trant turned his head too slowly and found a thin blade touching his gorget. Marin grunted and slashed. The Bravosi was gone. Only the shimmer of his jerkin where steel had dreamed of him. Bywater met Preston Greenfield with an ugly crash that startled a pair of pigeons out of the rafters and made the High Septon flinch. Balon Swan and Ares traded the first tentative cuts like men warming themselves, intent and almost courteous, until Ares slipped and Swan did not, and the courtesy ended in a sharp flurry of blows that clanged like smith work. Barristan and Ser Mandon circled each other twice, neither man liking how the other stood. Ser Mandon's mouth was a line. Barristan probed with the softest two cuts Ned had ever seen. Feints more than strikes, and Mandon answered with a precise, unloved parry. They understood one another immediately in the way two harpists might understand that the other could pluck the same strings. Ser Boros blunt roared and went at Santagar as if he could frighten the Dornishman into being slower. Santagar did not roar. He stepped. He let the roar pass by him and leave the throat open, and he put the point of his blade there as neatly as a tailor setting a pin. Blood welled. Boros choked and flailed. Santagar withdrew, measured, and went in again with a slice that cut red across red. Boros fell to one knee and then down, mouth opening and shutting to try to catch air that would not be trapped. Lancel Lannister hesitated. It could be said that this hesitation saved his life, for it kept him from stepping directly into a blow that would have opened him like a fish. It could also be said that it doomed him, because he went pale with the shame of it and charged too quickly at the nearest man, who happened to be the one with the slowest leg. Ned saw the boy coming. Lancel's hair was a banner trying to be brave. The green of his eyes was not Lannister green. It was the pale green of a lake frozen thin. Ned could have struck his head and ended him. Instead he caught the boy's sword with a parry that jarred his own bad leg, turned him, and brought the flat of his blade across Lancel's shoulder with a thud that made the boy cry out. The world narrowed to breadth and weight and the shape of the floor. Lancel recovered, came again, desperation in his teeth like thread. Ned disarmed him with a twist and sent his sword skittering across the mosaic, then forced him to one knee with the point at his throat. "Yield," Ned said. Lancel's eyes filled with tears he could not help. He opened his mouth and Joffrey, from beyond the line of fighters, shouted, "Stand up, you coward!" Lancel stood. He came with hands empty. He was going to grapple, Ned realized, and felt a cold, sad second of admiration. Ned half-stepped, half-stumbled, and drove his shoulder into Lancel's chest, sent him down and put his knee on the boy's arm and held him. "Yield," he said again. Lancel began. A roar drowned him. The hound had found fire. In the crush of bodies and steel, a torch had toppled and bit into the rushes near the smith's statue. Flame raced like a thing freed. Sandor's good eye went wide and then strange, that particular inwardness of horror that belongs only to those who have already burned. Loras pressed him hard and the hound fell back from heat, striking without aim, making a sound that was not a word. "Put it out," Ned shouted. and Jacelyn Bywater left off Preston long enough to kick the torch wide and stamp the flame, and a dozen hands clapped rags and cloaks and quenched it in seconds. Sandor panted, and for a heartbeat everything looked at him and remembered he was a man made of old wounds. "Yield," Loras said softly. He was close enough for only the hound to hear it. "Yield and live." Sandor spat on the floor and stepped backward out of range and let his sword fall. "I mislike the smell of that," he said, voice flat. "Call it the god's will." Boos and curses rose. Joffrey shouted something wordless which the September refused to carry. Cersei's lips thinned to a line that would have cut anyone who touched it. Across the floor, Barristan and Mandon finally closed. Mandon fainted low, and Barristan took it. The two old swords kissed and scraped and slid. Barristan drove his blade upward, and Mandon bent and kicked at his knee. The Lord Commander staggered and then used the stagger to cut longer. Mandon's eyes widened for the first time, and Barristan's blade took him under the breastplate at the seam with a noise like a sigh. They stood very close a second, the old man and the colorless man, and then Mandon sagged sideways, the white of his cloak a smear where it dragged through blood. Barristan pulled his sword free and did not look triumphant. He looked as if he had closed a door that he did not wish to see opened again. Syrio had been playing with Ser Marin. That was the only word. He had touched the man's armor a dozen times, the way a dancer touches the stage to remind himself of weight and balance. He could have driven his blade under the arm. He had not. Now he did, and when he did, it was like the end of a tune, inevitable and satisfying, the small sigh of relief that runs through a room when a note is resolved. Marin folded. Syrio stepped away so that the man's fall would not stain his boots and bowed to the father's statue, all grace and mockery. Bywater had a bruise on his jaw and a cut on his forearm, but he put Ser Preston down with a chop to the man's wrist and a subsequent crack across his helm that made the white enamel craze. Preston went to his knees and then down and lay quivering. Balon Swan and Ser Ares had made a good show. Now Balon flicked the man's blade aside and brought the hilt into his face with a sound like meat hitting a board. Ares fell in. A clatter of armor and a gush of blood from the nose, and did not rise again. Santagar stepped past the corpse of Boros and looked for another engagement. He found Lancel attempting to stand with Ned still above him. The Dornishman tipped his blade and inclined it slightly, as if asking if a man wished to dance. "Enough," Ned said. He lifted his knee and let Lancel roll. "Yield," he told him a third time, voice like ice cracking underfoot. The boy whispered, "I yield," and the words fell into the hush like pebbles into a well. Ned straightened as much as his leg would allow. He drew in breath. It hurt. He was grateful for pain. He looked across at Cersei. On the floor, two of the Queen's 7 still stood. Sandor, who had yielded, and Joffrey's pale cousin, who gasped and held his arm.
Ser Merin lei bleding, ser Boros lei dain, ser Mandon bled out, ser Ares groanek yetli, ser Preston muaned behind his el.
On Ned's side, all 7 stood, though Bywater braced himself on his sword as if he needed the steel more than it needed him, and Balon Swan touched his bruised rib with a wince. Syrio cleaned his blade by slashing it through the air. Loras bowed without inflection toward Sandor. The hound ignored him. The High Septon's hand shook as he made the sign of the 7 over the floor. "The gods have judged," he murmured, voice carrying on fear like a ship on wind. He looked at Cersei with eyes that did not know where to rest. "Your Grace, the judgment is against you." Cersei did not blink. Her smile was monstrous and beautiful. "The gods judge as men tell them how to," she said quietly. "I see whose swords cut today." The High Septon swallowed. "You must put yourself into the Mother's mercy," he said. "You are confined to the Great September until penance is determined. The charges of incest and high adultery must be answered. I will send to Dragonstone to bring back the king's brother Stannis, to hear the—" "Stannis," Cersei said, as if tasting something sour. "You'll summon that sour-faced—" "Silence," Joffrey said, and his voice cracked with youth and fury. He looked at Ned with hatred so complete it was almost relief. "Arrest him." No one moved. Janos Slint looked at his own hands. The gold cloaks shifted but did not step. Cersei's face went blank with calculation, and something else, something like surprise. Ser Barristan stood with his sword low, and that single fact made a shape around everyone, the way a tall tree makes a circle of shade at noon. Ned took a breath. He heard the river, faint yet, beyond stone and street and square. The city was a bowl. The sound in the bowl sloshed and found banks. He moistened his lips and raised his voice. "By the late King Robert's will," he said, letting each word build on the last as a mason lays stone. "And by the judgment of the gods, I am protector of the realm until the rightful heir takes the crown. The Queen Regent is confined to the September. Prince Joffrey is to be placed in the care of the faith until his parentage is adjudged. The City Watch will secure the Red Keep in the name of peace. Any who defy the faith or the protector will be treated as outlaws." There was a beat, a heartbeat, the shiver of a leaf. Then Jacelyn Bywater lifted his sword into salute. The line of gold cloaks along the nave raised their staves. The sound they made striking the floor in unison traveled up into the stained glass and changed into light. Varys bowed as if he were made of springs and sighs. Ser Barristan raised his chin a fraction. Renly, somewhere to Ned's left, laughed once, quietly, as a man might laugh when a jest he had not expected is made and is actually funny. Cersei's gaze flicked to Sandor. The hound met her eyes and did not move. She looked at Joffrey and put a hand on his shoulder, a claim she made one more time. "Come," she said softly. "We will submit. We will pray. We will consult the mother." Her mouth formed a shape that would be a kiss later and a bite later still. "And we will see." Joffrey shook her hand off and stood trembling. For a moment Ned thought he would make the room burn with him. Then he turned and strode out past the white cloaks who did not know whether to touch him, and the gold cloaks who had been told not to, and the crowd that parted like wheat around a fox. When he was gone, Cersei's shoulders dropped by a measure almost too small to see. She offered her hands to a septa and let the woman take her rings and bracelets and make a little nest of gold in folded cloth. Her face did not change. She spoke very quietly without looking at Ned. "You have lit a fire under a mountain, Lord Stark. When the mountain moves, it crushes all." "The mountain needed moving," Ned said, but he understood her careful, chilly truth. He leaned on his cane. His hands felt not so steady. The High Septon muttered prayers that sounded like lists. The mother's statue watched with a gentleness that was almost a reproach. The city breathed again, and the bells began, slower now, less a call than a benediction for a day already made. He found his daughters in a low side aisle where Septa Mordane had corralled a group of noble girls as if they were geese. Sansa was white, and her lips were pressed so tight he could see the line of her teeth under their pink. Arya was flushed, her hair wild, Syrio's lessons in every inch of her stance. When she saw him, she lunged forward, and Septa Mordane's hand clamped on her shoulder too late. "You stood," Arya said in a rush. "You fought. You and Syrio. You didn't get cut. I saw. Child," Septa Mordane hissed. "Mind your voice before the gods." "They have heard worse," Ned said. He touched Arya's hair. He looked at Sansa, whose eyes were candles set too close to wind. "Are you hurt?" he asked her gently. She swallowed. "Joffrey," she said, and then failed to find a second word that would turn him into gentleness or strength or anything he had never yet been. "He will be safe," Ned said, WH. It was not an answer and not strictly a lie. "He is safe with the faith." "He will hate you," Sansa whispered. "I know," Ned said. "Sometimes the truth makes enemies of us." They went out into the square together, moving slow through the press. Men looked at Ned and saw something they believed in or something they could sell. In this city, he had learned, those were often the same gaze. On the far steps, Janos Slint was already speaking to Bywater in a hiss he tried to disguise as counsel. Ned caught a phrase, "You presume too much," and saw Bywater's eyes flatten. "Ser Jacelyn," Ned called. "A word." When the man came, Ned lowered his voice. "You will take command of the City Watch." Bywater did not blink. My lord, you heard me. Janos Slint is relieved. Janos said a very soft, very mortal word and took a step forward in a kind of swaggering shock. On what authority? On the authority of the Protector and the gods, Ned said. He let silence grow around the last word. You will go home, Janos. You will take with you only what you brought into that post. One of my men will see you there. Janos measured him, then measured the gold cloaks now looking at Bywater instead of him, and the crowd and the September behind, and made a calculation that was quicker than he looked. I will appeal to the Queen, he said. You may appeal to the Mother, Ned said without humor. She is nearer. Bywater's mouth did not smile, and yet something in him did. He gave a short nod. My lord, hold the red keep, Ned told him. Seal the postern gates. Arrest no man unless he draws steel. He hesitated, then made what he knew was a dangerous choice. You will also detain Lord Peter Baelish for questioning. Bywater's eyebrows twitched. If I can find him. If you can find him, Ned acknowledged. He turned to Varys. And you will find me Renly Baratheon. Varys' smile returned like a friend who had been in the next room the whole time. I will find him, he breathed. Renly met him in a shaded colonnade, laughter still ghosting his lips. The youngest Baratheon had a fox's quickness and a stag's pride, and he wore them the way other men wore rings. Loras Tyrell stood with him, helm under his arm, hair damp and curling, a cut on one cheek that made him look more dangerous instead of less beautiful. Lord Stark, Renly said, you have done it. You have dragged our family's filth out into the light and made even the High Septon nod like a man who had meant to do it himself. I have done what needed doing, Ned said. The cane now felt heavier than any sword he had lifted. We must keep the city. Renly's gaze darted, measured, returned. We must put a coal in the crown or it will go cold. Stannis is at Dragonstone, and the Faith has already sent for him. Gods bless their simple hearts. He glanced at Loras with a look that carried a half-dozen unspoken things. He will come with ships and stern talk and fewer friends than he imagines. Meanwhile, the Lannisters will begin to put swords in wagons. My brother Robert's corpse is barely cold, and men will make the realm fight over who dares to move it. Then we hold it still, Ned said. And you think the gold cloak's loyalty can be bought with the coin you were wise enough to give Slint? Renly smiled like a knife. Perhaps, but they are city men. They like to be paid in coin and in stories. Make yours good. Ned looked at Loras. You stood for the Faith today. And for my lord, Loras said lightly, but something in the line of his mouth erred toward gravity. And against the Hound's blade, he is better than he looks. Or worse. Thank you, Ned said. He did not deal in extravagant gratitude. I may call on you again. You may not find me so near next time, Loras said cheerfully. I am only passing through the city, you understand. He put his hand on Renly's arm with a familiarity that politely pretended no one could possibly notice. The roads south are very fair this season. They'll be less fair with Lannisters on them, Ned said. They're always less fair with Lannisters on them, Renly said. And the smile he shared with Loras was the grin of two boys who have stolen apples and been clever enough not to be caught. We will go to Storm's End. Stormlords like a cause. They like a man they can cheer for. Stannis is not very cheering. When he speaks, the wine sours. The realm needs a king it can love. The realm needs the right king, Ned said. Renly's eyes flashed. Right is a word that breaks in a man's hand when he tries to use it as a hammer. He held up a palm as Ned's mouth opened. I know what you mean. I am not deaf to law. I merely offer another truth. Men will bleed not just for justice but for joy. If Stannis comes to the city, he will want your head for not sending for him first, and he will punish the Faith for daring to make a judgment without him. He will do it all very honorably, and the Lannisters will slip a knife between his ribs while he argues with lawyers. He leaned in. Let the High Septon crown you protector today. Let him declare the crown vacant and the realm in need of a steward until Stannis arrives. You will hold the city with the Seven's blessing and no boy king to command you. I will not be king, Ned said, more iron in his voice than felt good. I am Lord of Winterfell. I am Robert's friend and his hand. The realm will have Stannis or it will have ruin. Renly's impatience collided with a kind of grudging admiration and made him look briefly like Robert, for a heartbeat. Have it your way, he said. The Tyrells must go south. When we return, the city will be different. It is always different. Hold it. They did not embrace. They were not made for embraces. Loras and Renly withdrew into the crowd the way young wolves run into a wood, light and assuming the world is theirs. Ned returned to the Red Keep as if climbing inside a wary beast and laying a restraining hand on its ribs. He set guard. At the Kingsroad Gate and the River Gate and the postern by Maegor's Holdfast. He asked Vayen Pool to count the loaves in the granaries. He sent a raven to Winterfell that said what could be said without panic. He wrote to Stannis not through maesters whose loyalty he doubted but through the faith's messengers, urged by the High Septon's clerks in prayerful ink. He sent to the Vale for Catelyn, and stopped his hand before he wrote her name. He sent to Riverrun and learned that the Riverlands were ash and rumor, that Lord Tywin had set his dogs loose beneath the pretense of recovering his son, and had found his excuse very convenient. He wrote to Robb, not as lord to son but as father to son who would be lord. He told him to hold the north. He told him not to march. He told him too many things for one letter to hold, and then he burned it and wrote instead, "Be ready." Sansa came to him at dusk in the small hall, where he sat over a cold trencher and a cup of wine that he did not drink. Septa Mordane had pressed her hair into perfect order. She had found a gown with sleeves like the wings of swans. She moved carefully, as if she were made of thin glass. "Father," she said, and when the word came it sounded like something she had practiced and almost forgotten. "May I speak with you alone?" He nodded the servants away and set the cup down. "Always." She stood and twisted her hands and did not sit. "You have shamed him," she said finally, so low he had to lean to hear. "Before the city, before everyone. He is my betrothed." "He will not be," Ned said, not harshly. "He should never have been. He is not Robert's son, Sansa." She made a small sound. "But he is," she said, as if saying it could make it less true. She clasped her hands tighter. "I love him." He looked at her and saw her mother at 15. He saw something else too. A version of his own stubbornness turned inside out and made soft where his was hard. He thought of how his own love for honor had roped him. Thought of the first time he had taken a promise into his hands like a chain. "You love the stories that surround him," he said gently. "You love the shape of the man you hope he will be." "He loves me," she said. "He loves many things," Ned said. "Power, obedience, being the center of the room. You are part of those things to him. That is not love, or not the kind that keeps you safe." He put his hand out. She stood very still and then moved into his reach and let him touch her fingers. They were cold and thin. "I want you safe." "Safe," she whispered, and her mouth wavered. "What about Arya?" "I want her safe too," he said, and smiled, despite the day. "Though she makes it harder." As if summoned by her name, Arya appeared in the doorway a moment later, grimy and defiant. Syrio Farrell behind her like a thin shadow. The Bravosi leaned his shoulder to the post, eyes bright with humor and melancholy both. "You will dance again this week," he told Arya, as if the only thing that had changed today was the length of the shadows. "Tomorrow," Arya said, as if daring him to contradict her. She looked at Sansa. "Tomorrow you'll practice needlework." Sansa stared at her with a look that might have been fury and might have been something she had not yet learned to name. "Father," she said with a last, fading formality. "May I be excused?" He nodded and she left without curtsy. Syrio watched her go. "She will bend," he said softly. "She is a Stark," Ned said. "She will not. But she will not break either." Syrio nodded and then glanced in the direction of the September, as if he could see through stone and counting houses to the white steppes beyond. "In Bravos, when men fight for gods, they do it with words," he said. "And the city loves it. They shout and they sing and they weep. It is a carnival. Then they go home and nothing has changed. In Westeros, you do it with steel. Then everything changes. Do you think the gods saw? Ned asked, surprising himself. Syrio tilted his head. There are gods everywhere, he said, and smiled. But men are the ones who bleed. Night came down on the city with a slow hand. Torches flared. In taverns by the river, men told what they had seen, embroidered in the retelling with thread of fear and pride. They spoke of the hound yielding to fire, of the Bravosi who danced his sword into a man's throat as if drawing a line on paper, of the old knight who still had it, of the northern lord who had put his own body into the line. In the great September, Cersei Lannister knelt unveiled beneath the mother and whispered her sins to a septa with a face like dried fruit. And her whispered words were not the ones the septa thought they were. In a dark tower above Maegor's holdfast, a eunuch wrote 2 letters in a neat hand and lit the first with the flame of the second. In a different part of the castle, a slender lord counted coins and thought about how to turn the high septons trembling into a ladder. A raven made for Dragonstone, its wings eating up moonlight. Another slid west toward Casterly Rock, making a black line across the map in a straightness no man on the ground could match. When Tywin Lannister received that raven, he read slowly. He read the words that said his daughter was confined by the faith. He read the words that said the bastard truth he had been fitting in his teeth since his grandchildren were born was now a banner flying where his name could not tear it down. He read the name Stark and allowed himself the smallest, most private of smiles, because the name was just what he needed to bind his vassals tight. He stood at a map, hand resting on the riverlands like a cat's paw on a mouse. Jaime sat on a stool nearby with a cup and a bandage around one forearm and a face that had not yet learned to hide contempt when contempt was unprofitable. "Father?" Jaime said, as if the word were a joke he had heard too often today. Tywin did not look up. "We march," he said. "We march where?" "Everywhere," Tywin said. He had a habit, when he gave orders that would break men, of speaking as if he merely commented on weather. "Riverrun burns, the gods judge, and fools in dresses speak as if they were kings. We remind them what a king looks like across a field." "And Cersei?" Jaime asked, and for once did not make a jest of the tenderness that word pulled out of his mouth. "Cersei is a Lannister," Tywin said. "She will make the mother wish she had never heard confession." He tapped a point on the map with one clean finger. "Leave the priests to their bells. We will bring trumpets." The next days in King's Landing were quieter than the Day of Swords and louder. Fear seldom makes noise. Anticipation does. Men moved as if dragged by wires. The High Septon shut himself up with water and prayers and a dozen carefully chosen septons, and they argued about the exact shape of sin while his servants tried to persuade him to eat. Cersei took the mother's rope sash into her hands and let them bind her with it. She recognized the rope. They had used it to tie her children's cradle when they traveled to Casterly Rock. Once. Seemed fitting. She made herself soft. When the septa spoke of repentance, she looked demure. When they spoke of penance, she looked brave. When they spoke of Stannis, she laughed to herself, and the ropes felt lighter. Janos Slynt sulked. Ser Jacelyn Bywater made the gold cloaks practice salutes until the men's arms trembled with boredom. At Ned's order, he passed a writ that the City Watch would arrest no man in the name of any lord but the Protector. A rat-faced captain tried it in spite of the writ. His men brought him to Bywater in a bruised heap, and the knight stripped him of his cloak in the yard and sent him to the docks. The watchman watched that and understood what story they were in. Peter Baelish did not let himself be detained. Bywater found an empty chamber, a half-eaten apple, and a half-smiling note that said very simply, "We do what we can with what we have." It was not signed. The top edge was cut with a little flourish that suggested mocking laughter. Ned read it and stacked it with other signs of the man like kindling he could not yet ignite. He asked Varys where Baelish had gone. Varys said he did not know, and both men smiled at each other with the polite, punished expression of rivals who have agreed to drink from the same poisoned cup a while longer. On the third morning, Renly left with Loras at dawn, their horses' hooves loud in the lower square. On the fifth, a deputation from the faith filed across the yard like black beetles and asked to see the Lord Protector. They bowed and praised the seven and requested that the queen be allowed to visit her son in the presence of a septa, under guard. "No," Ned said. The most senior among them blinked. "It is Charity," he murmured. "A mother and a son." "She is not charged with being an unkind mother," Ned said. "She is charged with crimes that stain the soul of the realm. She has spun enough webs." "No," they whispered and spread their hands and backed out like men lifting plates of hot bread. The High Septon sent a longer letter the next day, copied in a scribe's best hand, speaking of mercy and of optics. Ned read it and let Varys translate portions into what they truly meant. He allowed Cersei to attend mass under a triple guard of septas and gold cloaks and to do so veiled, and for that the High Septon sent him a bracelet of prayer beads no one in the north would ever use. Sansa learned to move through the castle without brushing any of its menacing corners. Arya moved through it like a threat to the corners themselves. She darted to the kitchens and to the small mews where two hooded hawks watched her with arrogant patience, and to the practice room where Syrio made her stand on one foot with her eyes closed and her mouth shut. Once, when she stumbled out of a corridor's turn too quickly, she ran into Sandor Clegane. He steadied her with one big hand and looked down at her as if she were a puzzle to be solved with a sword. He had not left the city. He escorted Joffrey when the boy made his angry, chaperoned circuits within the September's confines, never letting his eyes linger on the mother's statue. Arya considered how to hate him properly. He considered how to despise her less. He was with Joffrey when the boy hissed at Arya on the September steps, under the eyes of 100 poor worshippers. "This is your father's doing," Joffrey said. "When I am king." "You're not," Arya said without the skill of diplomacy and with the strength of a stone thrown true. "You never were." She ran because Syrio touched her shoulder and insisted that sometimes the wisest words are the ones you do not wait to hear answered. Joffrey stood with his face purple and his hand shaking with the need to kill something he could not reach. Sandor's mouth made a strange shape that, if he had been someone else, might have been sympathy. The first raven from Dragonstone said that Stannis had received the Faith summons and the Protector's letter and would come to King's Landing to address the matter of usurpation and false issue, and to see the laws kept and the realm's peace maintained. It did not use the word please anywhere. The second said he had put his fleet in order and would not arrive without his banners at his back, because no man should ride into a city where his enemies had the stones to try a queen without being ready to fight in it. The third said nothing because no raven flew back in time to carry it. Tywin's banners crossed the tumblestone like a stain. Riverlanders burned cartloads of their grain rather than see it in Lannister hands. Men wept over fields they had sown. Mothers counted boys and found one fewer than yesterday. Word came to King's Landing with every new face from the west. Ned's courtiers, those he could not dismiss, those whose offices attached to pillars rather than to men, began to key. Pee softer shoes and more servants as if quiet would keep them from being noticed by war. Varys began to speak of supply more often than of whispers. Pycelle, cornered in a gallery, wept in Ned's hearing for the sheep of the Trident rather than for the men. On a night when the air tasted like old smoke, Ned went to the Godswood. The Red Keep's Godswood was a small pocket full of southern trees that did not know him. There was no heart tree. He stood beneath a low willow and felt his neck ache for the sight of eyes carved into bark. The little pool caught the moon and made a coin of it. He thought of the old gods who did not listen to words and the new ones who had listened today because men had given them blood to drink. "You have made a friend of the High Septon," Ser Barristan said behind him. He had come without the softness of white to give him away. The old knight's steps were quiet. Age had taught him to be a shadow when he wished. "I have made use of the High Septon," Ned said. "He and I are not the same." Barristan stood beside him without asking permission. "It is a privilege of men who have killed together, or near enough to together, to stand without asking. We will see Stannis soon," he said. "He will look at me as if I were a piece left over from a meal he did not enjoy. He will dismiss me and write in his ledger that one more old man stands in the way of his legal joy." "You are bitter," Ned observed. "Not very," Barristan said. "Only enough to taste, not enough to spoil. I have been a sword too long." When you are young, you want your sword to find the right neck. When you are old, you learn that the right neck seldom attaches to a head willing to stand still. If I ask you to hold the Kingsguard steady when Stannis comes, will you? Barristan considered. I took vows to the king, he said. Not to a lady, not to a council, not to a lord. When Stannis sits the throne, I will serve him. It will be a sharper service than Robert's. He will use men like nails, but he will not set the realm on fire to warm himself. He looked at the willow. I followed a Targaryen for love and fear and a story about dragons. I follow a Baratheon because paper says I must, and because perhaps paper can hold us steady where men cannot. Ned thought of paper. Robert's seal on his appointment, the faith's writ, the letters sent to far stones. Thank you, he said simply. When Stannis came, he did so under a sky like hammered lead. His ship's masts were black on gray, their sails unpainted. He marched from the steps with a face that looked as if someone had taken a file to it too long. Davos Seaworth walked 3 steps behind him in clothes too plain for the room and eyes that saw too much, and behind them Stannis' men, the banner of the crowned stag proper and unplayful. The city watched them enter and held its breath again. In the throne room, the iron chair waited in its cage of light. Ned stood on the dais with the High Septon at his left and Ser Barristan at his right, and the throne looked like a splash of frozen lightning no one had properly cleaned. Stannis walked to the foot of the dais and stopped. He looked up, and his lip curled as if iron offended him not because it was ugly but because it had been badly crafted. Lord Stark, he said, you sent for me, and the faith sent for me. His eyes flicked to the High Septon and back with a contempt that did not bother to hide. I do not answer to bells. I am here because the law is here. Where is the Queen? In the Great September, Ned said. Confined by the Mother's mercy. Stannis' mouth made a line. The Mother's mercy should keep to milk and candles. The Queen is to be confined at the Red Keep, under guard of the crown. The faith judges her, the High Septon blurted. The king judges her, Stannis said, and for the first time he looked not like a man and more like a title. He was all sharp edges and intent. There is no king, so I will do it for him until I am him. By the God's judgment, Ned said. She has been found wanting. God's judgment makes a very pretty noise, Stannis said. It fills rooms. The law builds rooms. I will have her brought to Maegor's Holdfast. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Ned saw the trouble already, like lightning above the horizon, and knew he did not have the height to strike it first. Stannis, he said very carefully, choosing not the man's title but his name. The city is held calm by the faith's ritual. The gold cloaks stand easier because the High Septon has his hands on the Queen. If we move her now, men will find it a new story to tell. We do not need stories. We need walls. Stannis stared. Something like surprise crossed his face so quickly it might have been the result of a breeze. Lord Stark, he said slowly, do you speak to me of walls? I speak to you of the city, Ned said. This is not Dragonstone. This is not even Storm's End. This is King's Landing, which is a kind of madness held together with trade. You will have the law. You will sit the throne as the law says. But until your men fill the streets with the peace of discipline, let the priests hold their pageant. It steadies fools. Davos Seaworth's mouth twitched. Stannis looked at him as if irritated to have been understood. Very well, he said, voice sour. For 3 days. Then I will have her. The High Septon nodded so quickly his crystal crown rattled. Meanwhile, Stannis said, we declare the boy a bastard and unfit to sit the throne. The court must sit to do that, the High Septon said weakly. Stannis' eyes chilled. Bring your quills, he said flatly. I will borrow the Iron Throne's shadow. And so, in a hall where kings had pranced and bled, Stannis Baratheon sat briefly on the ugly chair and did not seem to notice the blades pricking his legs. He called the lords of the city who still dared to be seen, and they came, one by one, pulled by obligation and fear and the desire to be a on the right side of something. He had a clerk read a genealogy that traced Robert's line down through only one name there fit to be traced. He had another clerk read out the faith's judgment and the names of the slain. When he called for dissent, the silence with which the hall met him was not assent, but it looked like it. He signed a paper that said the Queen's children were bastards. He signed another that said he would be king. He did not smile once. He was very careful not to look at Ned as he did it. The city did not explode. It might have, but it did not. It bent as Sansa would, as so much bends in this place. But far away in golden fields, men saddled horses at Casterly Rock. In the Stormlands, Renly could be heard in feast halls declaring that the stag who laughed would feed men better than the stag who scowled. In Highgarden, banners were oiled and measured. In Winterfell, ravens landed and made Maester Luwin's hands shake as he stripped their tubes with fingers grown more stiff. Robb Stark called bannermen and then dismissed them and called them again and learned to speak in a voice like his father's and not like his father's. Catelyn in the Vale threw her voice again against a wall made of her sister's fear and heard it come back alone. Tyrion Lannister, out of the Eyrie now, after a mountain goat path and a Sellsword's unwavering calculation, rode to the Riverlands with a face that said he had done very well because he was not dead and a mind that had begun, for the first time in his life, to wrap itself around a kind of responsibility that was not purely his. At the end of the third day, Stannis entered the great September of Baelor with a company of men who walked as if they were pillars and whose eyes did not bother to look at marble. The faithful drew back from him. He had the smell about him of men who do not believe in gods until they can punish them. The High Septon bowed and begged him to be delicate. Stannis was not delicate. He took Cersei by the wrist and passed her into the hands of Ser Barristan's men. She went without struggling and with the steady, glorious hatred of a woman who had carved out of her own scorn a palace where her pride could live even when she could not. As she passed Ned, she looked at him and let a single word drip out slow and exact so that he would have to carry it with him like a stone. "War," she said. He inclined his head. "Justice," he said back, and knew already that one of them would be right in the end only because the other would be too tired to keep arguing. In Maegor's Holdfast, under the eyes of women who had served 3 queens and not been allowed to love any of them, Cersei let them put chains on her and pretended she did not notice how cold iron felt. In the September, the High Septon fell to his knees and thanked the Seven for peace. In the small council chamber, Pycelle counted his own heartbeats and hoped to get to sleep without laudanum. In the Godswood, Ned stood beneath the willow and tried to hear snow and heard only river. By the time Tywin Lannister's outriders reached the outskirts of the city, the king had been declared and not yet crowned. Stannis wanted it done in the September with none of the savage spectacle Robert had enjoyed. The High Septon wanted light and incense and men's mouths full of words. The city wanted bread. Ned wanted the river not to run red. He got none of what he wanted in the way he wanted it. He got, instead, an outcome. The crown Stannis took sat on his head as if it had been made for another. He didn't mind. He stood before the father and the warrior and the rest and said nothing while the High Septon spilled a good wine over his brow. He did not kneel when he was told. He did not smile when he was crowned. He turned, and his eyes found Ned, and the look they shared was a pact that had not been written and a rivalry that had not been spoken. They were 2 men who had taken iron into their hands in different shapes and would not put it down until their fingers bled. That night, as if in answer to Cersei's careful curse, the first fires sprang up in the far wards where carts laden with hay had been set near too many opportunists. The gold cloaks ran, and the city ran with them. Ned stood on the ramparts and watched smoke unravel like bad luck while he sent bywater to the largest, and his messengers to the water wagons, and his heart to the gods. He did not sleep. He thought of Winterfell with its stones that had held after snow and rain and men's sadness for so long. He thought of ice taken from him and melted to a trophy. He thought of Jory, and of Joffrey's face at the September, and of Cersei's word. He thought of Sansa sleeping with her face to the wall, of Arya pretending to sleep with one eye open, knife under pillow, Sirio's voice making bravery into a game. He thought of how war came not in one river but in many thin rivulets that crept under doors. When dawn came, it came the way dawn always comes, particular, unpersuaded. Men who had sworn by gods they barely believed in went out to piss and to eat and to sharpen blades. On the western horizon, dust rose, slow and certain. Within the city, the bells rang again and again until it seemed they had rung all week. The sound folded around Ned and made him feel, for one long, cold instant, as if he had walked into his own memory. Varys came to him with the report that the small folk already told stories in which the trial had gone differently, because it is easier to live under a lie that comforts than a truth that hurts. Pycelle came to him with a list of herbs that might make a man sleep when he should be awake. Bywater came to him with a map of the streets and put his finger down on the places where the watch would stand. Stannis came to him with a glare and a demand. The gates would be closed to the west, and the city would be defended, and he would have the city's boys mustered in case he needed them. Ned gave him each thing he asked that did not break his back to give. The last thing Stannis asked, that he summon Robb Stark to bring the North south. Ned refused, and Stannis did not understand why one man's duty to law might break on the rock of another man's love. They met Tywin's outriders at the King's Gate and drove them off with horse archers Ned barely trusted and pikemen Stannis did not trust at all. They lost 30 men and kept the gate. The city breathed out, and in the pause that followed, news came from the Riverlands. Robb Stark had moved, after all, with a swiftness that surprised even his own bannermen. The boy had 6 and possibly 8,000 men and could be 12 if the mountain riders came with him. He had taken the Golden Tooth or had not. He had crossed the Green Fork or had not. He was coming either way. He was coming like winter, like a thing that does not hurry and yet cannot be stopped. Ned stood very still and felt a cold that had nothing to do with breeze. He had told his son to stay. His son had not. He was not sure whether to feel shame or pride or dread. He decided, because there was no third choice that did not seem like cowardice, to feel all three and keep his face. It is one thing to set the gods to judge the crown. It is another to set men to fight for what the gods have judged. Before the trial, the city had 100 petty wars. After, it had one great one. Ned found himself thinking, in odd moments, of the way the Braavosi had bowed to the maiden's glass with a grin. Syrio had said, "There are gods everywhere. Men are the ones who bleed." He had been right. He had also been wrong. The gods bleed too. In war, their images cracked, their temples burned, their altars stained. The gods bled because men made them, and men unmade them again out of need. The first true clash came at the Mud Gate, where a party of Lannister men in lion-bedecked helms tried to mask as merchants and were turned away and then tried again with steel. Bywater held them. Ser Balon Swan took a cut that would leave his ribs colder in winter. Santagar killed a man whose armor had been too heavy for the heat. The Hound, who had been seen drinking in a riverside tavern the day before with his eyes fixed on nothing, appeared, led a squadron of household knights into the fray, and cut 2 men down like grass. No one knew whether he had been sent. No one asked. He fought like a man distracted into doing the only thing his body knew by habit. Joffrey watched from the great west window of Maegor's with bitter purity. He said nothing, did nothing, thought of knives. Cersei, below, in her chamber, sat with a cup of wine and did not drink it. She listened to the echo of boots and wondered, not for the first time, if she had chosen the wrong way to make herself free. She thought of her father's face when a servant told him in a rushed whisper that his daughter had been judged by a sweating priest with crystals in his hair. She wanted to see that face. She wanted to cut that face. She wanted 1,000 things and sat very still and imagined she already had them. What the trial had altered, above all, was the story the city told about itself. The faith had shown that it could drag even a queen into its light. The hand had shown that he could put his own blood in the way of swords. The kings had shown that they had no gift for smiling. People told these things to one another to decide whether they should be afraid. They told them to decide whether they should hoard bread. They told them to see which neighbor would sell them first. And yet, in the pockets where such things can be, new loyalties grew. Carrie the baker, whose oven burned less because the watch took wood for the walls, began to bring half-loaves to the barracks without the abashed look of charity. Molander the potboy tipped water on a torch that might have set an alley alight and did it with a shrug that moved like a prayer. A woman whose child had been jostled on the September steps and whose knees still hurt from kneeling to pick him up lit a candle in front of the mother and whispered, "Bless them," not quite sure which them she meant. The city made itself again with such tiny motions. It is how cities live. In the weeks that followed, words became as sharp as steel. Stannis would argue about titles while arrows flew. The High Septon would wring his hands and then knot them with fervor and deliver sermons that sounded more like orders. The little council met and disagreed and agreed and wrote memos that turned into rumors that turned into glances that turned into wagers. Ned slept little and ate less and found that his leg hurt most when he had to stand still. One night he went to the room where the line of hands brooches lay in portrait. He found Ser Barristan there alone, looking up at a painting that had not been mended after a crack ran through it. The crack was like a white river. The subject was a man Ned did not recognize. A hand from a time when men wore their hair differently and dressed in colors that would have embarrassed this court. Barristan smiled at it and then looked away. "We will hold," Ned said, because sometimes a lie, if spoken enough, moves itself closer to truth out of embarrassment. "We will hold," Barristan agreed, and did not lie. He spoke as if he had learned that the word could be made real by deciding where to place one's feet. A courier burst in later with a face as battered as his boots and a voice that rasped like metal to the stone. He dropped to one knee in the small council chamber and lifted a sealed letter. Ned took it and broke the seal and read. The room watched his face. He put the letter down. "Robb has crossed the Trident," he said. "He is come south. Against your wishes," Stannis said, not gloating, not overly displeased, just noting another piece on the board exactly where he had expected it to be all along. "Then we shall see whether the wolf runs where we need him." Ned made no answer. His heart had already go. Any out ahead across swaying bridges and muddy shallows and found a boy with his mother's hands on a banner pole and his father's voice saying to the men around him, "Steady now, steady." The war, when it came fully, would be told in songs that did not mention the day the gods were asked to judge and the men obliged them. But it had begun there. It had begun when steel rang under colored glass, and when an old knight folded his white cloak, and when a boy who had imagined himself a prince stalked from a hall because the room would not obey him. It had begun when a foreign sword danced an old dance under new saints, and when a city crowded the steps of a temple because it was the only place they knew where words could matter. Sometimes, on the very edge of sleep, Ned would see again the moment when he had put his blade to Lancel's throat and spoken the word yield. He would stand there in his mind, and he would wait for the boy to end him by surprise, or to make him end the boy to his disgust. And every time in his mind, Lancel would whisper, "I yield." In that dream, the boy did not lie. On waking, Ned always wondered whether what he was fighting for was not victory or peace, but the possibility that one day more men would put down their swords when Bid and fewer would have to be killed for a lesson to take root. One evening, as autumn came mocking the city with a breeze that smelled like a promise of cool that would not be kept, he went to the great September and stood at the edge of the mother's shadow. The floor still bore faint scars where flames had licked it and where blood had dried, though someone had scraped and polished and lit all the candles to make the light lie on it in a softer way. He stood and listened to a Septon droning about mercy, and to a woman whispering a prayer for her brother's safe return from the Riverlands and to his own breathing. He did not kneel. He had never learned the kneeling of the South. He stood and gave the gods what men never give each other, time. Cersei had been removed many days now to a cell more comfortable than any Ned had seen given to a thief. She awaited a formal trial that Stannis insisted upon, as if insisting could make the world logical. In her room, she sat with her hands folded and replayed every moment of her life where a man had smiled and thought himself clever. She lit air on fire with the memory of her father's mouth when he realized she had been put in chains. She laid patience out on her lap and smoothed it with careful hands. She whispered to herself the names of the men who would bleed for her, and the names of the men who would bleed because of her, and kept them separate because it pleased her. Syrio Farrell left the city on a ship whose captain bowed 3 times to the father, 1 time to the stranger, and then took his men out the river and past the gullet and into a sea that did not know kings. Before he left, he taught Arya one more trick with her feet and made her promise not to use it unless she needed to break a man's knee. She promised. She did not promise truthfully. He laughed without sadness. "You are very much a Stark," he said, "but also very much not." And somewhere on a night that came later but felt like the same one, Sandor Clegane sat in a shabby room with a jug of wine and watched the flame in a single candle make his hand shake. He put the candle out with his fingers and watched them smoke. He thought of a garden without fire. He thought of a little girl with a sword too small to matter. He thought of a prince's face when told he would not be a king, and the way some men grow more dangerous when the world tells them no. He did not pray. He did not sleep. When the sunrise crawled in, he put his mail on and went to the yard and beat men into being marginally better at surviving. The war became the landscape. It rose like mountains and sank like marshes and spread like fog. Ned moved through it like a man in woods where the paths are braided and each step could be a root clutching at his ankle. He made new alliances out of old antipathies and put iron on map edges and sent emblems down roads like messages to the very earth. When he had time, he ate. When he had less, he remembered the taste of barley and salt. He learned the peculiar rhythm of Stannis' command, how the man would break you with fairness and save you with the same, and he set his own pace to be just off that, because he had no interest in being broken or saved without needing either. There were days when he thought it would have been easier if he had not forced the gods to speak. There were others when he knew that if he had not, the city would already be ash. In the memory of light through painted glass, he stored a promise to himself, that there would be a day when no man in this city would need to cut another man to prove his faith, and that even if he failed to see it, he would have fitted his own small stone into the wall that would keep such a day standing. He wrote again to Winterfell, and this time he sent nothing that was not plain. He told Robb he loved him. He told him he would do his best to keep him alive and to keep the North a place where wolves ran and snow fell as if it belonged. He signed the letter Eddard, and then crossed it out and wrote Father. He sealed it and sent it with a man he trusted to die before he sold it. When the city finally exhaled, as cities do after holding breath for too long, it did so on a morning washed clean by a rain that had come in from the sea and made even the red keep smell almost honest. Ned stood on a balcony that looked east and felt drops lift the hair at his temples. He could not say that he had done well. He could say that men still walked, and the bells still rang, and the river still brought boats with their little human hopes in bundles on their decks. There was much killing still to do, and too many dead yet to be made into stories. But for a small span of time he allowed himself to be only a father, and to think only of the sound Arya's feet made when she tried to sneak into the kitchen and failed, and the way Sansa tilted her head when she tasted a new sweetness and pretended that she was not pleased to be pleased. He let himself think, just for as long as it took a raindrop to run from brow to cheek, that asking the gods to judge might have been the last honest act a dishonest city would allow him. It had not saved them. It had not saved him. But it had thrown a kind of light across a floor men had grown used to walking in shadow. Sometimes that is the only thing a man can do who has no use for crowns. Make light fall where it did not, and take whatever comes after with his hands steady and his back straight. A bell rang. The city stirred, obedient and unpersuaded. Ned turned from the rain and went inside to write another letter, and to receive another report, and to decide which piece of truth could be afforded today. The gods had judged once. Men would go on judging every hour until the last. Faces would be painted in glass with their deeds, and then shattered by other men's bad aim. He picked up his cane. His leg hurt as it always did and would, a kind of reminder. He went toward the weight that had become his companion, and the day that would be his work, and the road that would take him as far as he could go. He did not look back at the city. He did not need to. It was in him. It would not now leave.